Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But we begin inevitably and tragically with the terrorist attack in Berlin. This terrorist attack seems to be pretty much certain now. 23-year-old man who, or certainly Pakistani origin. Hard to imagine any other motivation that isn't linked to Al-Qaeda or Islamic State. We know that they have been instructing their acolytes in continental Europe and beyond to consider this truck attack as their new tactic. I suppose if things were less heated and less frightening, we'd be looking at the questions of security. I mean, what can you actually do to stop someone hijacking a lorry and driving it into a crowd full of people, or even renting a lorry? It's why you suddenly realise those slightly annoying concrete bollards that appear outside embassies or sometimes pop up unexpectedly on your sort of paths. That's what they're there for, to stop people driving vehicles into buildings or crowds. The simplest and yet the most brutal of terror attacks. Things upon which we can agree. Ordinarily quite thin on the ground on days like today, but we keep on trying. Things upon which we can agree. If you drive a truck into a crowd full of people, there is no way of knowing what religious denomination or ethnic origin those people have. One of the first women to die under the wheels of the truck in Nice earlier this year was a headscarf-wearing Muslim woman called Fatima. For the record, most people don't feel any different sense of sympathy or tragedy according to the identity of the victim. Most people, I still believe this, you don't look at a crime and feel sadder when somebody wearing a headscarf gets killed or somebody not wearing a headscarf gets killed. It's a human tragedy on a huge scale. 12 families being torn apart this Christmas in Germany. Whatever they turn out to be from, or whoever they turn out to be, the sympathy we as human beings should feel for each one of them should be identical. But here's the thing, it isn't, is it? We're not living in a world where we see everyone as equal, and we're not living in a world where we see everyone as equally deserving. And that, again, I desperately despise people who try to use events like this to score political points, but at the same time it would be absurd to try to conduct a conversation that was in any way insulated from the broader political picture. It's a tightrope that some people choose not to try to walk. That tightrope. Some people will use a terrorist atrocity like this to insult the widower of a murdered British politician, a widower who actually rather, I thought, poignantly observed this morning that when you try to blame the actions of an extremist upon a politician, particularly a democratically elected politician, you are on a very, very slippery slope. You really are. I hesitate to suggest that's something we could file under things we all agree on, but we bloody well should. When you actually start trying to blame elected politicians for the actions of extremists, whether they're religious or political extremists, then you've got problems. You've got big problems. And the world has big problems. I was watching the news unfold yesterday. It was the assassination of the ambassador, the Russian ambassador in Turkey, that I presumed would be dominating the news agenda today. And then as you watch that, you get the little flash appearing across the bottom of the screen that says there'd been a shooting in Zurich, at a mosque in Zurich. 3 people shot there, the perpetrator apparently dead. That has been completely overtaken by events a couple of hours later in Germany, where this Christmas market was the target of an attack that is as horrific as it is simple. Polish man in the passenger seat died of his injuries at the scene. If it turns out that he was in some way being held hostage and still alive while the truck ploughed into the people, I begin to see just how grisly and grim his final moments must have been. But let's look at the broader picture together today. I need your help, as always. I'm nothing without my phone calls. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. I appreciate that there is an appetite in some corners of my country to start screaming blue murder about everybody who's brown or everybody who's Muslim. I appreciate that appetite exists. And in many ways it informs the question that I'm going to ask you now, because filing under things we can all agree on, we know what Al-Qaeda want, we know what Islamic State want, don't we? They want to cause maximum carnage in order to sow the seeds of division in Western societies. This is what they're trying to do. The freedoms that we enjoy, the tolerance that we used to trumpet, the values that we used to think we shared with each other are under threat, and on a scale that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. These are the values that are under threat, and these are the values that are despised by Islamist murderers. The values of tolerance, the values of freedom, the values of fellow feeling, warmth, all of these things. Do you know, and I appreciate, again, this might be a difficult pill for some people to swallow, but the refugee policy that Angela Merkel adopted in Germany, although fraught with difficulties and far from perfect, it was by far the most effective kick in the face for ISIL. It was a more effective kick in the face for ISIL than any bomb that could have been dropped on their headquarters, or any sniper who could have taken out their key personnel. Because what that did, very simply, was utterly undermine their rhetoric, their narrative, their propaganda. So the propaganda of Islamic State is simple. The West hate us. The West hate you. Even if you were born there, even if you live there, they hate you, they hate you, they hate you. There will never be peace in the Islamic world until we're completely separated from these Western infidels. They hate you, they hate you, they hate you. Go and blow them up. They hate you. Go and kill them. They hate you, they hate you, they hate you. And Angela Merkel, in one fell swoop, absolutely punched the living daylights out of that position, absolutely destroyed that position for Islamic State. Yeah, how can you continue to preach that the West hates you when it's thrown open its arms and thrown open its doors to welcome the huddled masses from war zones? And again, you don't have to be black and white about this. You can say it would surely have been possible to have some sort of measures in place to limit the possibility of people getting into Germany who had no business being there. But again, I mean, what? I turn up at the border. I suppose language tests, something like that. It's possible to come up with things that might have been able to sift a little more effectively this tidal wave of humanity that made its way into the country. But make no mistake about the international political reasoning behind Angela Merkel's decision. It was by far from a uniquely domestic decision. It was simply to state that Islamic State are wrong when they say that the West hates all Muslims. So they'll be celebrating today, and they will celebrate louder every time somebody stands up, whether it is a politician in Germany or a public figure elsewhere in the West, and they stand up and effectively agree with Islamic State. They speak in a way that makes it clear, we think you're all a problem, all Muslims are a problem, all Muslims, all of them, we hate them, and Islamic State will be cheering that. Islamic State will be cheering that. Every time somebody stands up in this country and speaks in a way that lumps the guilty in the same boat as the innocent, it's what Islamic State do. Don't make distinctions. And remember, when you drive a truck into a crowd full of people, there's no way of knowing the religious affiliations or the geographical origins of the skulls that you're crushing. And yet we choose to forget all of this. Why? Because we're frightened. And what's another word for frightened? Terrorized. We are now terrorized. Every single tweet, every message, every call, every comment, every private thought that actually sort of begins to confront the utter nonsense that everybody of a certain faith must, by definition, be culpable. They're guilty until proven innocent, and they can't prove themselves innocent because you don't know what they're going to do tomorrow. That is exactly where we are being led by these scumbags. And it surprises me sometimes that we go along with it so blindly. We go along with the same ideology that they espouse. Oh, we can't live alongside each other. We can't live in peace. We can't live in love. Christianity is defeated by hate. And that seems to me, on days like today, is where we are. You start talking about you find 1 million people from anywhere. You're going to have some very ill people among that million. You're going to have some very sick people. You're going to have some evil people. You're going to have some brilliant people. You're going to have some geniuses. You're going to have some idiots. You take 1 million people from anywhere in the world, and you are not going to be able to guarantee that every single one of them will be a fine, upstanding citizen. Tragically, you take 1 million people from anywhere in the world, you're not going to be able to guarantee that none of them will be murderers. None of them will be terrorists. None of them will be evil. So what are we fighting against? It seems to me that the normal people are now caught in a vice. Normal people who don't really ascribe that much importance to where you come from or what faith your parents followed when you were born. Normal people who try to look beyond these labels in order to assess the worth of a human being. I think we're losing now, aren't we? It's joint forces. The people who preach that the West hates Muslims on both sides now of the debate seem to have the loudest voices. It's quite bizarre when you think of it like that. What are the two sides? The two sides here are people who believe you can live in harmony and peace, and people who believe that you can't. That's it, right? Driver of that truck doesn't believe you can live in harmony and peace. People who talk about Angela Merkel's policy somehow being inevitably leading to events like this, they don't want to live in harmony and peace. Leave them in the war zones, leave them in Aleppo, leave their children to starve. We don't want them here. They're on the same side, right? And then there's people, naive, idealistic, muesli knitting, sandal wearing, do-gooding, virtue signalling, liberal fools who just can't shake off the Christian notion, forgive me for bringing religion into it, when obviously it is not a solution to many problems in the world, but it was moving to hear the Archbishop earlier with Vincent Nichols, the Cardinal Archbishop. People like us, we're just losing. Because some people are just so desperate to believe that we can't live in peace. So desperate. And when something like this happens, you can almost hear the celebrations, not just in the heartlands of Islamic State, but also in the hearts of people whose hatred somehow gets invigorated and endorsed and validated by these sort of actions. I'll say it again, even though it's a little boring. When you drive a truck into a crowd full of people, you don't know who you're going to kill, and you don't care, because you're not there to do anything other than terrorize the people left alive afterwards. And the more terrorized we are, the more like terrorists we become. But we still have choice. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I haven't actually asked you a question. I probably should. Are they winning? The forces on all sides of these stories. The people who say we can't live alongside each other in peace. Do you think they're winning? 0345 6060 973. For the record, actually, I thought I did at 10 o'clock this morning, but I don't. I still don't. Oh, the words of the Archbishop ringing in my ears, the Bible message that we'll all be hearing over the course of the Christmas period, the simple notion of peace and goodwill to all. Yeah, I can still buy all. I'm not going to choose the recipients of my peace and goodwill according to the colour of their skin or their country of origin or the faith that they follow. I reserve my deepest disgust at the actions of people who commit atrocities like this. In whatever name and whatever reason, I despise them to the very, very bottom of my heart. They bring misery, heartbreak, bloodshed, pain, and utter devastation into the hearts of innocent people. They are the scum of the earth, but I will not let their crimes colour me against people who haven't done anything wrong. And that's the choice we face. Are we going to hold more and more innocent people responsible for the actions of the guilty? And I'm afraid, at the end of this year, of all years, it's hard to find much optimism. And you may not even agree with this, you know what to do if you don't, and the phone line will be open. But I think we can all agree that the attacks like the one we've seen in Berlin are designed to cause maximum carnage and to sow the seeds of division in Western societies. As Peter Foster, the Europe editor of the Daily Telegraph, writes today, they are to pit Christians against Muslims, Europeans against those of Middle Eastern descent. Are they winning? Mohammed is in Islington. Mohammed, what do you think?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
Well, one of my best mates a couple of weeks ago came to the UK office to work. He's German, from Germany. Yeah. And I said to him, I'm going to take you to Winter Wonderland in Hyde Park. So when I heard this news, first, actually, before I forget, I want to give my condolences out to, obviously, the 12 families and the wider German public, because they must be stunned. I just heard Merkel say live, how could you do that? How could someone think to do that when we've been kind to you? Yes. And that's the thing. Well, what kind of a nutter are you that you could think this is okay? The country that opened its door and was generous. You know, that guy had no right to do that. Obviously, we don't know the full backstory, but they had no right to do that. And I want everybody to know everyone is grieving, whether you're British or whether you're French, German, Muslim, not Christian, atheist. It's just wrong. Now, to answer your question, are they winning? No, they're not winning, and that's why they're desperate. They're desperately not winning, and that's why they're attacking normal people, going about their everyday business, enjoying the evening with their family. And we have to remember that these people, exactly as you said it, they're angry because I tell you something, a lot of the Syrians are really, really touched by the generosity of what the Germans have done. And that's probably angering the ISIS individuals or the ISIS-inspired people. However, I do think we need to be a bit careful and be rational about it, which is they're not always going to be a terrorist organization. Sometimes they work as lone rangers, like, for example, what happened in Tunisia. The guy was this kid, 16, 17-year-old, stupid. I'm sorry, he wasn't part of a wider terrorist group.
Well, maybe not, but equally, there was a 12-year-old boy who was attempting to detonate some sort of suicide vest at a Christmas market elsewhere in Germany earlier this month, I think, and it may well be that they've radicalised themselves, so to speak, online or whatever it may be.
That brings me to my next point.
Well, hang on, because hang on. You are perfectly within your rights and within reason to say there's no evidence that this is part of some massive terror cell. But you can't discount the actual existence of Islamic State and Al Qaeda and the ideological inspiration they provide.
Absolutely, you're right there. But I guess where I'm trying to go with this is how then do our security forces adapt is basically what I'm trying to get at. Because it's so easy when they say on TV, nobody's claimed responsibility. I think that can be too easy sometimes. I think we need to look at a case situation, and that's hard in itself, because how many times can you analyze each incident in a unique fashion? It's easier to say it's part of that. So the Nice lorry driver was a million miles away from what you would expect a quote jihadist end quotes to be. So looking for these unifying themes is. You're right. There will be nowhere near as many as some members of the media seek to pretend. But I'm afraid there is one massive unifying theme, and with a name like Mohammed, it's not one you're going to like, is there? Is that all of these people are under some form of flag-labelled Muslim? Absolutely, and I just hope, and I'll leave it on this because I know you've got loads of callers, I'll just hope that people are intelligent enough, and I know they are, not to let these people divide us, because I love being European, I love being British, and I love my faith, and I think it gives me such solace. And at this time, I am going to pray for those 12 people and their families that, lost their loved ones in this time when they just wanted to spend just a peaceful evening with their families, and that could have been me and my mate in Hyde Park. God knows.
That is, I think, the point, and I sense you've got a lot more to say, and I thank you for recognising that there's lots of other people waiting as well. But that could have been me and my mate in Hyde Park, says Mohammed in Islington, and that's the point. If you're looking for us and them, it's the people who might get killed by these scumbags versus the people doing the killing. And the people who might get killed by them is all of us. It's Mohammed and his mate in Hyde Park. It's Fatima in her headscarf on the promenade in Nice. And it's Gerhardt. I don't have the names yet of the victims in Germany, but it's all of them. You're either trying to kill us or you are us. And yet that seems to me in 2016 to be a message that is drowned out by other noises. Terrorists versus everybody else. But what are they seeking to do? Terrorise us. Make us terrified. Terrified of whom? Oddly, terrified of Mohammed. Richard is in Glastonbury. Richard, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James. First-time caller.
You're very well. You've picked your subject, Richard.
Yeah, I can't say I'm a fan of yours, but hey-ho. Yeah.
Do you know what? I read something brilliant yesterday. It's Adil Ray, the comedian. Someone was being rude to him for no reason on Twitter, and he said, I don't like Greg's pasties, but I don't feel any need to go into the shop and tell them. Might think on, Richard. Anyway, what did you ring in to tell me?
You got me on that then, haven't you?
I suspect that's something you're used to. Carry on.
Islamicist extremists. I think, is Islamist, is it? Islamicist. Is Islamist extremist. My view of this morning is, in my little white ghetto down here, that to use any sort of Christian prefix to what's gone on is sort of is just wrong, because this seems to be, when you kill random people, Muslims, Christians, blacks, whites, red, it just renders you mad. And I think somehow people that are being so-called radicalised are just joining a sort of some sort of spell of madness.
But you can't ignore the inspiration of Islamic State. There's a clue in the title. I agree with you, actually. I don't think it is necessarily helpful to have these labels, because you end up conflating the guilty with the innocent, and that is something that is obviously wrong and deeply, deeply dangerous. But to remove it completely from the equation, that would be, well, not only impossible, possibly naive.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
It is, Richard, yes.
At times my politics are both naive and idealistic, but
hang on, I thought we were enemies. Naive and idealistic, mate. I got the T-shirt.
So I just want to really stick to that. I think you forfeit whether you... I do want to disentangle Islam from that. I don't think... I've got a Quran here at home and I've got a Bible. I haven't read either. But I can't imagine that in either of those books it will say, go and kill everybody. It just renders you mad, doesn't it?
Do you want to know the real kicker here, my friend?
Go on.
It will say that in both of those books.
Well, go and kill the other.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, straight up. Seriously. You keep listening, Richard, however much pain it may cause you.
Thanks for having me on, James. Bye-bye now.
Keep listening and keep learning. Deanna is in Northwood. Deanna, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello, Deanna. Oh, well, that was short and sweet. I think the phone line's gone south rather than Deanna deciding that was all that she wanted to say. Can we try and get her back up? I'm full of cold today. My apologies if the subsequent gurglings and attendant wheezings irritate you down the radio line. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you want to join in. Covering some ground here. And you listen, you can say what you want on this programme. You know how to get in touch. You know what to do. I'm steering clear of some of the more... unhelpful contributions, but I acknowledge their existence. People who do in my country, people of my background, my ethnicity, my professed religious faith, who are like the terrorists of the belief that we can't live alongside each other. These attacks are calculated to cause maximum carnage and to sow the seeds of division. So everywhere you see a seed of division, you see success for the terrorist, in some sense. I don't know where that leads, I don't know what happens next, but I do think it's important to recognise there are only really two sides in a war like this. There are the people who agree that we can't live alongside each other, that Christians and Muslims or Europeans and Middle Easterns must be at each other's throats for all eternity, and then there are people who don't agree with that. And it's also important to remember that regardless of where you sit on that particular fence, we'll all die the same when a terrorist turns their attention on us. They do not distinguish. And again, just at risk of overcomplicating things, can you even contemplate these conversations? Can you even conduct these conversations without also reminding each other that Saudi Arabia admitted yesterday that they've been dropping British-made cluster bombs in Yemen, cluster bombs that remain fatal years after wars have ended, and they were made in Britain. The idea of the terror being something that we've imported rather than it being something that in many ways we've watered is also got to be on the agenda today, hasn't it? And in the meantime, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So simply, are they winning? If it's all about sowing division and enforcing the notion, selling the story that Christians and Muslims, Europeans and those of Middle Eastern descent cannot live alongside each other in peace, are they winning? I think I need to explain why on mornings like this I always start off with things we can, or trying to find things we can all agree on. No one's going to have any problem with Angela Merkel suggesting that the man responsible for these murders, this terror attack in Berlin, should be punished as far as the law will allow. Actually, it's quite a steely phrase. Most of us, however much we may ordinarily subscribe to liberal values, most of us would probably contemplate exceptions to things like opposition to the death penalty in the case of killers like this, but that's what values are. They're consistent. They don't change according to who you're applying them to. That's the fundamental foundation stone of Western democracy. That is equality before the law. You don't get treated differently according to who you are. You only get treated according to what you've done. Now, if you are a fundamentalist of any flavour, but obviously in this context Islamist is the most obvious, if you're an Islamist fundamentalist, you passionately reject that doctrine. You passionately believe that people should be treated differently according to who they are, not what they've done. Believers should be treated very differently from infidels. Supporters should be treated very differently from skeptics. Homosexuals should be treated very differently from heterosexuals. That is what they subscribe to, a school of thought that preaches murderously the importance of difference and division. That's what they preach. That's what they terrorize us for. because we historically represent the opposite. But I think they're winning. I think more and more of us in this country, in the West, are turning into people who actually think you should be judged according to your origins, according to your ethnicity, according to your colour, according to the faith that your parents followed. More and more of us are turning into that. And that's what they want. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong thing to do. It's another lazy. It's like calling people, no, everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi. It's possible that this is the only meaningful defence we have against Islamist terror. But that's quite a big leap, isn't it? It's quite a lot to give to some scumbag in Berlin last night. That's quite a big jackpot to hand to him. The idea that, yeah, the only way we can deal with scum like you is to turn on ourselves, turn on our neighbours, turn on our own values, dismantle our freedoms, undermine our civilization, turn into fundamentalists who judge according to where you're from, not what you've done. Roy's in West London. Roy, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello,
firstly, I'd just like to offer my condolences, my thoughts and prayers out to those people affected by the horror that's unfolding in Germany. And to also just say that I'm a Muslim, and I'm also a paramedic. I worked on the ambulance service, and I was witness to the 7/7 atrocities that happened in London.
Yeah.
And some of my colleagues went down with post-traumatic stress. Whenever I hear something like this happen in Germany, it frightens me, because I'm scared for myself, for my family, for my friends, because I know how close that an incident like this could just take out anyone. It could take out any of my friends, any of my family. They work and live in London. And it's not... I don't think it even comes down to religion. It just comes down to hatred. I think it's people they hate and they just want to destroy. And they have... You can't talk sense to people who don't understand sense.
But there's a famous phrase that you can't reason somebody out of a position that they weren't reasoned into.
Exactly. And it frightens me. It frightens me whenever I hear this, something like this. I'm scared. I'm just scared.
Do you change? I mean, you mentioned you're a Muslim yourself, so your answer to this question is almost it has to be in a way different from mine. But do you change your life at all? Do you avoid these sort of... Being a paramedic, you must be constantly conscious of how close we are to the cliff edge as human beings all the time, how close we are. We're a cigarette paper away from disaster. Every time we get in the car, every time we cross the road, you'll be more aware of that than everybody. Events like this affect you differently, though.
Events in Germany?
Yeah.
I don't understand affecting how differently. I mean...
Well, that's what I'm wondering. It's the randomness of a terror attack. It's the same as the randomness of a natural disaster or an act of God or a road traffic accident that you might have attended. This is, as a Muslim man, you kind of lose on both fronts. You're frightened of being a victim of this sort of terror attack, and you're conscious of the fact that some people will see you as somehow on the same side as the perpetrator.
Yes. I'm also fearful of a backlash as well. I hear stories of people getting attacked because they're wearing a hijab or because somebody has a beard. And it's, so, I mean, I'm scared on both fronts, but speaking from a personal point of view, I think I'm more scared as a victim of terrorism.
Yes, and a victim of the backlash. It's a horrible place to be, isn't it? Do you, I know this is quite a crass question, but all my callers so far have kind of managed to steer clear of the crassness and focus on the nuance. I know you will as well, but I apologise for the clumsiness of the question. Are they winning at the moment? The people promoting the terror and the hate, are they winning?
I don't think so.
Good.
They're in the minority, and I have so many family and friends who are in the Islamic faith, and we're celebrating Christmas. We are integrating society. We all have jobs, we all have friends, and none of us can understand. No one can understand taking the life of an innocent person. It just doesn't register, and it disgusts us really when we hear that. It disgusts us on both fronts, because to hear that these acts of terrorism are being dished out by people who proclaim themselves to be Muslim, it just disgusts me to my core.
Of course it does, and I mean the notion that it wouldn't disgust you to the core because you are of a faith that is the one the man who did this will probably claim he was acting in is I mean, it's lovely to hear your voice, actually, because the sort of bewilderment. Why would anybody think that Roy would be anything other than disgusted to his core by the events in Berlin? But then, of course, you'll find a few. Someone need new vocabulary almost. I can't keep saying scumbags. You'll find a few idiots, a few apologists, or doing the old but line, oh yeah, I condemn it, but they're a lot thinner on the ground than they used to be. But what you do, you find a few of them and you pretend that that's what all Muslims are like, and then you actually do your own brand of rhetorical terrorism, mental terrorism, intellectual terrorism, terrorizing people, so that's why when they get on a bus and they see somebody wearing a headscarf, they try and pull it off, or they scream at them and they insult them. And that is on the rise in this country, but so far so good. It doesn't feel like, in your world, in your view, it's rising at a sufficient rate to constitute victory for the terrorists. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. But they do exist on both sides. Dave is in Harrow. He writes, the crowds going into a European mosque have never been targeted by a Muslim in a mass murder attempt. Well, there were 3 people shot in a mosque it appears by a fellow congregant in Zurich yesterday, Dave, but I don't think any of them have died yet, except the actual attacker. But he goes on, Islam is totally incompatible with Western life, and even you will one day acknowledge this. So Dave in Harrow is preaching exactly what Islamic State preach, that this is incompatible, and also that we hate all Muslims. So if you were doing the job of Islamic State recruitment officers today, and you heard someone on LBC read out a text from Dave in Harrow, you'd go, there you go, look, there's a bloke in Harrow, thinks that you're utterly incompatible with Western life. And that's it, mate. Dave, you're doing it for them. They don't even need to drive into crowds in Berlin, as long as you're there saying that, yes, they're right. The hate preachers are correct. We do hate all Muslims, and we think they're all potential murderers, and that's why their way of life is totally incompatible with the West. You're on the same page as Islamic State, Dave. But you still won't see it. David is in Manchester. David, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Firstly, this morning, I'm really concerned. I'm horrified and I'm angry. I read about this last night before I went to bed, and the death toll went up another 3. You asked the question. What the question is? Are they winning? It depends what your version of winning is. Do they make me feel frightened? Yes, they do. Your previous caller, and can I just say again, I feel totally for these families of everybody there today.
Yes.
I'm really, really upset about it. But, are they winning? It depends what your definition of winning is.
Well, Dave in Harrow's text provides me with a useful answer to your question, doesn't it? Here you go. The Islamic State want to create a world in which everybody believes that these 2 ways of life are incompatible. If you're from the Middle East, you can't live among Europeans. If you're a Muslim, you can't live among Judeo-Christian ideologies. And every time you see a text like that, you think, if you do what I do for a living, crikey, there's another one. There's another convert to their view of the world, and that's what victory would look like for them.
Yeah, but there is. But your previous caller spoke so much sense. He really did, and he hit the nail on the head. I look at this. I tell you what I worry about with this today.
Yeah.
Forget the man's ethnicity, forget his religion or his beliefs. Who did this? It is yet again. This is what I worry about. It's yet again tainted the word refugee,
yes.
And what it's done. And so when you say winning, if it means, is it dividing the West and the Middle East, and is it dividing the West for taking refugees? Well, then it depends what argument you're on, whether you're winning or whether you're losing. And it worries me that there are millions of refugees all around the world that are legitimately genuine, and we have these attacks, these people that are coming in. You did hint on they all seem to have the same common denominator, which is the same sick ideology. But the problem is that what it's going to do, this is yet again, put another layer on top and give ammunition to you-know-who to turn around and say, look, there you go, they're all bad, we told you so. This is what worries me.
This is exactly what we're talking about in the context of who's winning and losing. The people who believe that we can't live alongside each other are winning, even though they swear that they're sworn enemies and they hate each other even more than the rest of us do. They're on the same side. We can't live alongside each other. We can't do it. What's Dave said? Incompatible with the West.
I don't think they are, James. I think what your previous call said was correct. There are people, I've said this for decades, there are people that are born, right, that are naturally evil, and it is nothing to do with religion or to do with their, how they're brought up, whatever. I genuinely believe there are people who are naturally evil the minute they come out of the womb, and they manifest themselves.
That's a very un-Christian. It's a very un-Christian worldview, but it is.
Well, I am a Christian, so I can't say that, Jay.
Well, you're not supposed to. I mean, we're supposed to be, I suppose, the notion is easier to swallow, actually, the idea that there's nothing you can do to stop this. But I think it's more complicated, David. I think that there are points at which you can stop people going down this path, but some people will go down it regardless of what efforts you put in place to protect them. And what tempts them down the path is, of course, the suggestion they all hate you. All these people at that Christmas market, even the Muslims aren't proper Muslims, they all hate you. They all hate your way of life. So you drive your truck into the middle of the crowd without knowing who any of those human beings are. And then some people, almost before the truck is cleared away, some people in the West are queuing up to agree with Islamic State and say, yes, we do mistrust, as David suggests, we do mistrust you all, we do hate you all. You should have stayed where you came from. And of course, it's doubly problematical that the fella isn't even a proper refugee. If he's come from Pakistan, he hasn't fled a war zone, has he? So that automatically becomes, rhetorically speaking, proof that all million refugees that Angela Merkel welcomed into Germany, they're all swinging the lead, they're all fake. The ones that aren't terrorists are economic migrants. Never use the word human. You never hear them use the word human, do you? Never use the word human. They can't use the word human, because to use the word human is to remember we're so close to being identical, all of us. Human is a unifying word, so they never use it. They use words like creature, don't they? 10:46 is the time. Where the question is as bleak as it is simple. If we accept that the motivation behind murderous rampages like the one we saw in Berlin yesterday is to sow division, to sow the seeds of division in Western societies, to attack the values that these fundamentalists despise, then you have to wonder whether it's working. Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing when he spoke of Muslims in his particularly vile speeches. You know what he does now on his victory tour, bless him? He's laughing at the people for being vicious and violent. So you're not vicious and violent anymore, are you? So he's calling his own supporters vicious and violent. And they're lapping it up because they've been radicalised. They've been terrorised into this position of hatred and anger. You see it a lot in this country. If you go to the LBC Facebook page or just go to the replies to the tweet coming out saying James is talking about the Berlin attack, you can see people who've been radicalised into their hatred, like Dave in Harrow. Can't live alongside. We can never be compatible. And this after a gentleman came on 20 minutes ago who was working as a paramedic on the day of the July the 7th terror attacks. Don't even begin to imagine what he would have seen that day. He's a Muslim, but we can't live alongside him because it's incompatible. I'll show you just what I mean. I don't want to get bogged down in it, but just to give you an idea, Mark's in Cheshire as well. He says, I don't know why you don't convert to Islam. You are always defending them and their religion. So again, Islamic State will read this to their vulnerable, potentially brainwashable followers, and as they see it's true. Look, this guy's in Cheshire. This guy's in the middle of the home counties. And he hates you all. He hates all of us, not just the ones that commit the atrocities. It doesn't matter whether you're a terrorist or not. They're going to hate you anyway. And then Mark wades in with his little text to prove it. They have many horrible ways, and they do not want to integrate into our ways and our system. That is why we cannot live together, nor will they be accepted in our country. Seriously, if you think I'm going off on one here, you tell me what exactly from the second two sentences there wouldn't come clean out of the mouth of a mad mullah, of a hate preacher. They have many horrible ways, and they do not want to integrate into our ways and our system. They are infidels, and they do not follow the one true God. That's what you're saying, Mark, mate. They have many horrible ways and they do not want to integrate into our ways and our system. That is why we cannot live together, nor will they be accepted in our country. That's what causes refugee crises, Mark. They will not be accepted in our country. You silly sausage. Honestly, you're on the wrong side of history. But 2016 has taught us that pointing that out to people doesn't always lead to pennies dropping. 10:53 is the time. Keith is in Southgate. Keith, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say, James, that I think that terrorists, almost by definition, are losers. The means that they use are sort of inversely proportionate to their actual influence as individuals in society. And to some extent, the influence of the ideas that they claim to espouse, or religion, or whatever other thing that they claim that they ascribe to. When you look at the individual psychology, not that I'm a psychologist or any expert at this, but you read little sort of biographies of individual terrorists who over the years have been caught. You find that typically they're people who've been losers in one way or another. They've been petty criminals. They've had hard and difficult lives. It's not to insult them or insult any of the ideas that they claim to associate with, but quite often they've been latecomers to those ideas, and quite often, actually, if they were put on the spot and asked, sort of probed, they've got a fairly sort of incoherent sense.
Well, the fellow in Nice would have been tossed off a rooftop by Islamic State if he'd actually found himself in the middle of their heartlands. He'd had gay affairs. They were documented after he died in the attack. The notion that they're following some sort of holy mantra is palpably absurd, but it doesn't matter because that is the word that emerges immediately if the links, when they're established, as they almost certainly will be, back to Islamic State or back to Al-Qaeda. You can't remove religion from it any more than you can remove the word terrorism from it.
I guess my concern is that, perhaps we put too much weight on their claim to associate with, a particular ideology, religion, or whatever it is, because that is really the only point of association.
Yes.
Unless you're going to go down the route of sort of, people's ethnic origins and things of that sort, which are even more dubious. So I think within our media and within our sort of broader discussion of these things, perhaps we dive too quickly down an avenue which actually leads us to the kind of division that you're talking about.
Yes, and I mean the grim conclusion that if they hear people like Mark in Cheshire and Dave in Harrow's text to this, what's it?
Well, I don't know Mark and Dave, and I'm certainly not going to insult them on air. I know nothing about them.
I don't want you to insult them. Just react to the idea that people in this country believe, like Islamic State believe, that we can't live alongside each other.
Yeah, but, we have politicians in this country, and certainly, there's a politician sort of, well publicised that you mentioned just a little while ago across the Atlantic,
yes,
who, very freely engage in that kind of thing. And I think, those people and all of us as individuals need to take a look at ourselves. And, I think more frequently we should look at the psychological dimension of these things rather than immediately go for the sort of, simplified.
And of course, if we do that, then we'd be talking about Dylan Roof in the context of what happened in Berlin yesterday, rather than just referring back to, and we talk about Thomas Mayer as well, the white supremacist killer of Joe Cox. We talk about what they all have in common rather than trying to punt. And you might be right, maybe people like me fall into this trap as well of thinking that there's something peculiar or unique about the kind of...
Easy to do. I think that particularly, in the wake of an incident like this, because that tends to be when these things happen, and we've seen it before, all too frequently, including this year. What happens is in the wake of these things, all of this rhetoric comes out, and, there tends to be this, polarization. Now, I'm not pretending that we don't have a polarization going on within our wider culture and society, and it saddens me.
Well, it's very profitable for some people, don't forget.
For sure. Which is probably a lot of the reason why it goes on, other than the kind of psychological stuff which I was alluding to.
Yes.
But I think my broader point is that, if all of us on an individual basis, and this sounds rather idealistic, but,
Nothing wrong with that. We need idealism at the moment.
If people just took a look at themselves just for a moment and just sort of, where am I really coming from on this?
Whose side am I on? Am I on the side of the people who preach that we can't live alongside each other, or am I on the side of the people who preach that we can? It really is that simple. And although the tactics are different, the messages are exactly the same. Keith, thank you very much indeed. It's 10:57. Martin is in Wood Green. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. The question as to whether they're winning or not, to me, seems pretty simple. The fact we've had Brexit and Donald Trump. What more evidence do we need to suggest that their tactics are winning?
I think I understand your point. It'd be an awful lot of people, and it's my job to remind you of this and to speak up for them. There'll be an awful lot of people who voted to leave the European Union who do not for a moment subscribe to the school of thought that says people from the Middle East can't live alongside people from Europe.
Well, it definitely has allowed a lot of animosity. And I mean, I can even think for myself, when we was attacked, the very next day when I'd be getting on a train or a bus,
yes,
I could sit there and I could look at somebody who was maybe dressed fully in Muslim attire, and I would feel in my head, hang on a second, but then I'd also have a clashing thought in my head, and I don't want to get up and offend this guy, but then I'd have another clash in my head saying, but why should I care about what he thinks? I should only care about me. And the moment that you admit that to people and you start being called a bigot and things like that, you then have this division that starts.
Do you? Because I mean, I did the same. I remember on air saying, a Arabic-looking lad got on the tube with a rucksack about a week after July the 7th, and I got off. And no one suggested that was evidence of bigotry or prejudice or anything like that.
Well, yeah, they have a word for that. They call it Islamophobia.
But no, it wasn't Islamophobia. It was me reacting to something that happened a week ago, and it was silly of me, and I don't do it anymore. But no one called me names, and I wouldn't dream of calling anybody else names, because that is a short-term reaction to a terror attack. I was temporarily terrorised. But to stay terrorised is a choice. It's a choice that increasing numbers of people are making. They want to be terrorised. I like the hatred. It keeps me warm at night. Every time an attack like this happens, you have two choices. Either you're on the side of the people who believe that we can't live alongside each other, or you're on the side of the people who believe that we can. I'm quite happy after that hour to know where I stand. Where, it's happened too many times, hasn't it? We find ourselves responding to a horrific attack upon Western values. I think we can agree on that. Can we start every hour on a day like today trying to cobble together things upon which we can all agree? The problem is, I wonder whether even that statement is true anymore. We can all agree it was an attack upon Western values. Western values, historically, are the opposite of division and the opposite of, if you like, splits based on faith, based on colour, based on ethnicity. Since the Second World War, the whole of Europe has worked so hard to move away from that world. I'm beginning to wonder whether it's worked. Because you know that in your country and in America and elsewhere, in Germany and in Holland and in France, there are people queuing up to say that because a terrorist has just driven a truck into a crowd of people in Germany, then immigration is something that has to stop, and Muslims are all evil, and taking in refugees is a stupid thing to do because one of them might turn out to be evil. And those voices are loud. They're so loud that one wonders if beneath exaggeration to suggest that the preachers of division are somehow winning. I'm going to take a few more calls on this because you've been so patient in waiting. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need to join in. And then I'd like to have a crack at Scottish politics. We are a national radio station at LBC. Most of you probably know that, but it's possible that you may be labouring under the illusion that we're confined to London. Only because we used to be, not because our output reflects that in any way. And it intrigues me that south of the border, we probably don't have as deep an understanding of the political situation in Scotland as we should have. It's possible, in fact, that the average Englishman at the moment, or Welshman, Northern Irishman, I think would be excluded from this observation. It's possible that we've got a better understanding of American politics at the minute than we have of Scottish politics. And that's something I want to look at. If Nicola Sturgeon is serious in her desire to see Scotland retain single market status and therefore presumably be comfortable with freedom of movement, what does that do for the whole of Brexit? We'll get onto that this hour as well. But in the meantime, Angela Merkel has said we must assume it was a terrorist attack, and although I agree with her, it has been pointed out to me that it's a little unethical to say, as I have said a few times in the last hour, links to Islamic State will doubtless be established. Of course, until they are, I should have stayed silent. Jerome is in West Norwood. Jerome, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Basically, I wanted to say we have a split decision in my house. Personally, I do not feel they are winning. I still feel it's a minority of people who are causing the backlash. And whereas my wife feels that minority are growing steadily, and I feel it's a lot to do with our personal experiences. My wife is a niqabi. She wears a niqab, full face covering. Over the last 2 weeks, we've probably had 5 or 6 incidents, verbal abuse directed at my wife. I too have experienced some verbal abuse, but nothing major, mostly funny look. But I still believe it's a minority of people. I mean, only last week my wife went for a job interview wearing her face covering, and as a perinatal mental health support worker, and got the job, even though she wears a full face covering. However, she was tempted to cancel the interview because of the bad press that we're receiving. I wouldn't say bad press, but, some of the backlash we receive. So, I mean, her life has been threatened while she's with our children on her own. Lots of swearing and go back to where you come from. It's not until she opens her mouth that they realise, well, actually, she's from here. We were not born Muslim either. We were reverted to Islam some years ago. So
I'm surprised at your position. I'm surprised how you can describe what your wife has endured in recent weeks and conclude that there isn't a growing agreement in the West with the doctrines of Islamic State, that we can't live alongside each other. If your wife is being treated like that, I'm surprised that you retain your optimism.
The reason why I don't struggle with it, James, is because, in my honest opinion and humble opinion, I feel that these people are cowards, and even if we had not had these terrorist atrocities, they would still have a problem with somebody's difference. And what happens is they have become emboldened by people like Trump and some of the comments that are made by respected figures in society. So they've just become emboldened, and they kind of, flock together and get the confidence to say what it is they want to say. However, they're still a minority. So for me, in my opinion, they're trying to cause terror as the same way as the terrorists are, and just a bunch of cowards, to be honest with you.
Can I ask you a question, man to man?
Yeah.
Seriously, if my wife was enduring what you've just described, I'd be begging her not to go out in the face veil.
If I'm honest with you, I'm not sure if you know this, but it's not a compulsory thing for them to wear. Some people disagree. But,
no, I know, but if my wife was getting spat at in the street and abused in the way that you describe, I would beg her to take off what is loosely describable as the target.
Well, if I'm honest with you, James, I mean, as I said, I fully believe that it's a minority of people, and it is frightening.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people you've described as abusing and threatening your wife in the street. Why are you not begging her to? Why are you not begging her to take off the face veil?
Because even without it, she would.
It was the first thing you mentioned. It was the first thing you mentioned as the identifying feature that explains the abuse she receives.
I know, but that would be similar to me saying, you know what, I wish I could change my identity as a young Afro-Caribbean male.
No, it wouldn't.
My skin complexion.
No, it wouldn't, because you can't change your skin complexion. You can take off your T-shirt. You silly man. That's a stupid parallel.
But good point, but I couldn't change the fact that I'm a man, and that comes with stereotypes too.
You couldn't change the what?
And I couldn't change the fact... Oh, no, hang on. No, the way I dress, for example, as well, that does bring some attention, unwarranted attention. I mean, I'm a Muslim man. I have a beard. I'm not shaving my beard out there. I don't know. As I said, even if she put the face veil off, James, I still feel she would receive abuse.
It's worth finding out, isn't it?
As a Muslim woman. Well, she hasn't wore it all the time, and we've had abuse both sides, so... It doesn't really change anything.
I think it probably does. I think it probably does, and I think that if it was my, and we can part in disagreement on this one, but
yeah,
I think part of your role as a husband is to do everything you can to protect your family, and you're not.
I do, in my opinion, but I
but you don't. You're not.
Opinion.
You don't.
That's your opinion, James, and opinion as well.
It is my opinion, but I'm pretty sure I'd win the argument.
Thanks for letting me on the show with the best.
Okay, off he trots. Martin's in Stevenage. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, Martin. What's on your mind?
So I've given you a call because I wanted to say we're discussing this from a religious point of view, that Muslims are doing this and we live in that way. I think ultimately the countries that they're from and the way that the laws and the way that they're raised, I think it's jealousy. And I think the jealousy of the West, it's angry people doing things out of jealousy and leading others to do the same thing. And what you started the conversation with, whether are they winning or are they losing? I think where we're having markets with armed police, we're having this discussion about bollards going up. It's changing our way of life very slowly at the moment, but ultimately we're losing some of the freedoms that we enjoy. And I think ultimately the people that want that...
Are we, though? Are we really? I mean, armed police at a Christmas market doesn't impinge upon my freedoms in any way.
I mean, so... To give you a real life example, in about 3 hours I'll be travelling across Europe, due to go down to the ferry shortly. Now we're driving pretty much the full extent of the continent.
Wow.
Finishing up in Slovakia. So we'll be crossing the Austrian-German border,
yes.
Which still has border restrictions in place that weren't there previously.
It does.
Again, obviously that's partly to do with the migrant crisis, but it's a lot stricter because of the risk of undocumented and unchecked migrants coming in, because they could be part of this radical group, which to me on a personal level has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with jealousy and a cult whereby people have given people this mindset that the West is evil. And I think it stems back from us having the freedoms that we enjoy that's pretty unique in the world, us and the States and Australia in the Western world is still fairly unique. And I think that's where they're trying to damage that, because they haven't had that in their countries.
And yet that is the most tragic of analyses, because essentially every step back we take from whatever you want to call it, tolerance, multiculturalism, diversity, harmony, peace, every step we take back from that is a step forward for them. And yet the people encouraging us to take steps back are the people who claim to be the most potent opponents of what you describe, of the terrorism. So, I mean, I'm struggling to get the words out, because you put it so well. The idea that every single time we do something differently from what we did before, the terrorists score a point.
Yeah, precisely.
Well, I'll leave that hanging. I'll leave that out there. It tallies with what I've been saying, but Martin put it a lot better than I've managed to. 11:13 is the time. By way of balance, I'll find you some texts and tweets that subscribe to the school of thought where we're cautiously exploring the idea that there are people here who would describe themselves as Anglo-Saxon or Christian, Judeo-Christian, or whatever it may be, and they too are now of the same view as the Islamic State hate preachers. We can't live alongside each other, and suggesting that my callers today who've described themselves as Muslim have a hell of a lot more in common with me than the bloke driving that truck into the crowd full of people ever will, is somehow controversial to these people. 11:14 is the time. I've got more calls to come on this. If you want to join in, you can. I'm going to keep it up for a little longer. 0345 6060 973. But I'm also interested this hour in... Well, here's a challenge for you, and take it as such. A question I don't think anyone can actually answer. What would Great Britain look like if Scotland stayed in the single market and the rest of the country didn't? This is, it seems, well, not it seems, this is what Nicola Sturgeon is expected to outline later today. We'll keep an eye on what she says. She's speaking at the moment. But plans for Scotland to remain in the single market while the rest of the United Kingdom presumably doesn't. How would that work? I hesitate to reach for this. It's such an obvious line. But would we have to rebuild Hadrian's Wall? Already going to have an open border with Ireland, I think. Wheels are coming off, aren't they? And one wonders whether the timing of the latest terror attack on continental Europe is possibly more injurious to world peace than any of the previous ones. It's amazing how quickly the focus moves. France has suffered indescribably in the last couple of years. Absolutely indescribably. Again, and I keep making this point because, unfortunately, I have to. And I don't have to keep making this point. Believe me, no one will be more relieved than I am when I can stop. But, of course, the French terror attacks, I've said it before, the Charlie Hebdo attack, the first policeman on the scene was a Muslim. He got shot in the head. He's dead. The Nice attack on the promenade in France, a woman called Fatima wearing a headscarf, one of the first to go under the wheels of the truck. So that's why I struggle so much with the idea that terror attacks like this are somehow proof that they're all dodgy, that they're all rotten. Imagine being not only exposed to the risk that we're all exposed to as a result of terrorism, but also exposed to the widespread belief. I've read you some of the texts and emails today. Believe me, they're the tip of a very ugly iceberg. Not only are you at risk of being attacked, but you're also going to be in the firing line when people are looking to vent their fear and to articulate the fact that they're terrorised, they're going to blame you, or they're going to take it out on you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. May is in Kilburn. May, what would you like to say?
Hi, Mr. James. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. What's on your mind?
I'm so happy to speak to you. I listen to you every day, and I'm actually now. I decided to call because I every day I listen to you, especially when it's something about Muslims and all this craziness that's happening. I would like to call and say something, but I just don't feel like maybe I will be heard or understood.
Yes.
I'm sorry, my English is not very good, but
Nor's mine. Don't worry.
But today I'm really so angry when I woke up and I heard all these things, and I'm like, okay, when this thing is gonna stop? Because seriously, I don't want to be judged because of someone else's action, because simply this person and I share the same religion, although it's not actually the same religion. He says he's Muslim, but this is not what Islam says or tells us to do, to kill other people, to kill innocents, even if they're not Muslim. So this is not accepted at all. At all, it's not accepted.
I understand that, but of course, it would be possible to, with any religious book, you can twist it and turn it into whatever you want it to be. So every time people describe Islam as a religion of peace to me, I can find, without too much difficulty, bits from the Holy Book that portray it as the precise opposite. And I qualify that because it's important to qualify that by saying I can do the same with the Old Testament. I can do the same with the Bible. So you don't get a get out of trouble card just by saying my interpretation of religion is peaceful, because there are plenty of people whose interpretation of religion is very violent.
Yeah, I understand. And the thing is that even those people, I mean, a lot of like the Islamic State, they kill Muslims as well. The people who don't go, with their views or don't do whatever they want to do, they kill them as well. So now I am a Muslim. I wear hijab, but maybe it's not the same hijab that they are calling for, which is like, wearing niqab and the big dress from up to toe. Okay, yes. This is an Islamic thing, but it doesn't go with here. I live in Europe. I live in England, so I should not be wearing something makes me very different. This is what my religion tells me. I have to go with the society, but in the same time keep some of my values. So, and I have to be nice, and I have to speak to other people nicely. It doesn't really say that you cannot coexist with non-Muslims. But there are two. Angry.
Well, I understand your anger. I really do. And I sort of. I almost understand the opposite of your anger as well, which is it's not a sign of nastiness or a particularly evil world view just to be confused now. And you see, well, all of the people doing these things, they all say that they're Muslims, so surely it makes sense to be suspicious of all Muslims. It's self-preservation. It's like the ludicrous argument Donald Trump's son used about sweets. So if you've got a jar of sweets and you know one of them is poisoned, then would you really eat the sweets? I mean, that's humanity we're talking about. It's like saying if you know that somebody out there might be a murderer, would you ever leave the house? So there's arguments on both sides, but I guess you're caught in the middle.
I know that you are a person that do understand this and might give us the benefit of doubt and all these things. But there are some other people, and I don't want to call names. There are some other people in LBC station that, come up on the radio and say nasty things about Muslims all the time. And believe me, there are lots of Muslims like me. We would like to do anything to stop this craziness. We are willing to do anything. And it's real, because we live here. We are part of the society. We are Muslim, but we are British as well, and all these things makes us, frustrated and angry because we will be taken wrong. I am not going to quit my religion because I want to, people accept me, or I don't want to be misjudged or anything. But at the same time, I am not going to stop fighting to show people.
I don't know how you do that, because of course this is the other sort of camouflage that is worn by the hate preachers on the other side of this argument. So why aren't they all on the streets condemning terrorism? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And of course it happens. You just heard me. I'll do everything I can, everything in my power. Do you think we'll stick a microphone around to Kilburn if May is there cooking tea for her neighbours and trying to be friendly to people? Do you think that's going to go? Do you think she'll do my holiday cover? Is that going to work? Or if May was preaching hatred and spitting bile, the microphones would be underneath her nose in a flash. It's why that idiot Chowdhury got so much attention, because it just puts more bums on seats, as opposed to the massive majority of people who will be like May and every other caller to the programme today, utterly appalled by what's gone on in Germany. It's 11:24. Speaking of callers to the programme today, quite a few of you are unhappy with how I spoke to Jerome and the suggestion that his wife should stop wearing her face veil if it is prompting other people to abuse her. I take your criticism, but I've made my feelings about the face veil pretty clear. And you're right when you say my argument was the same as you should put one on to stop yourself getting raped. You should take it off to stop yourself getting shouted at. So I just mentioned that I've received all of those criticisms, but I also subscribe to pretty strong views about that garment, and I'm not going to change, not yet anyway. Waleed is in Leeds. Waleed, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Thanks for having me on. Your box of trolls have done the number on in terms of pandering to this almost Daesh-led rhetoric that Muslims are discriminated in the West and their values are completely at odds with Western values and that they can't integrate with wider society. So in terms of division, I suppose the extremists on both sides have everything in common.
Yes.
Just staggering, really. I mean, mine.
See, that should be the point at which half the world goes, "Oh my God, he's right," shouldn't it? That's why you pause, because you sort of, they've got so much in common. We can't live alongside each other. It's disgraceful. It's incompatible. That one of them might be dodgy, so we should leave 1 million of them to drown. This should be the point at which everybody kind of goes, "Oh yeah, maybe I'm getting maybe we need to join forces to fight the terrorists rather than thinking that we fight terrorists by attacking people who aren't terrorists." But it doesn't. The penny's not dropping, Waleed.
No, well, the term jihad's been thrown around like hors d'oeuvre today. My interpretation of the term jihad is quite simple and as thus. It is to strive or struggle to uphold the faith. Now, what happened in Berlin, as far as I'm concerned, is completely at odds with my religion. So I guess my own personal jihad and the jihad of most moderate Muslims living in the West is that, it possibly starts with calling shows like yours, James, and cultivating an environment where we can have open conversation, where we can try and assimilate ourselves within wider society without compromising our inherent belief systems. It is possible. I do it on a day-to-day basis. Most
Muslims do, but obviously if you change your name to Anjem Chowdhury and started doing the opposite, you'd be on Channel 4 News and you'd be all over LBC by tea time. Unfortunately, by being moderate and normal and peaceful and articulate, you don't get the big ticket invitations, do you?
No, you said Anjem Chowdhury and putting bums on seats. It really does.
Do you know when I really realised that? I'll tell you when the penny dropped for me, and this is no criticism of him or of the man I'm about to mention. I'll criticise Anjem Chowdhury until the cows come home, but this is no criticism of Alan Titchmarsh or the production team on that programme. But I used to do the daytime TV show when I was on the sort of pundit circuit, having arguments with people like Gloria Hunniford about all sorts of issues. A very strange way to earn a couple of £100, but there you are. And they booked Anjem Chowdhury to come onto the Alan Titchmarsh show on daytime TV. And I sat in the audience because I was filming later. And it was literally like Jack and the Beanstalk. The audience were booing and hissing, and it was as if... And he was loving it, Waleed. He was absolutely loving it, twisting his beard and leaning back expansively. Loved it. Loved with that narrative of victimhood about how, I say this and everyone hates me and da-da-da-da-da. And yet the audience... were part of it. They were booing. You're never ever going to get invited onto a programme like that just to sit there and say, hang on a minute, we're pretty much the same. Why can't we all just get along?
No, he's the archetypal antagonist.
Yes.
And again, I mean, you pay a licence fee. People want to see what comes back on that licence fee. And it is, do you know what it is? Even I'm captivated by that conversation in a lustful way. I see the likes of Anjem Chowdhury, it rolls me up, and it does pique my interest, albeit not in a good way.
Yes, of course, because it's like slowing down for a car crash or buying a ticket for the ghost train. The people punting the hatred and the anger and the fury and the bile, whatever their colour, whatever their creed, their box office.
We're rubbernecking. I think that's the best way to put it. I think everyone's just rubbernecking. They're looking back at the accident and... there's no value to be gleaned from that.
Well, except for the people that you began by discussing, of course, the people who are rubbernecking the car accident, the road traffic accident, and then thinking that all brown people should be banned from driving cars as their sort of response, just to conflate the two strands of conversation. Waleed, thank you. It's 11:30. Pretty much, if you are like me, of a sort of essentially white Western background, pretty much every Muslim you meet will be like the ones that have called the programme today. And yet, when you stick someone like Anjem Choudhury on the telly, or you get some headbanger waving a placard around calling for an international caliphate to be installed, there is a deliberate decision, a deliberate choice by many people in the West to see that as somehow more realistic than the bloke you sit next to at work or the bloke who drove you home from the club last night. There's a willfulness involved in that choice, and it's a willfulness that is enhanced every time there's a terror attack like the one in Germany. More and more people are being encouraged to choose to conclude that everybody who calls themselves a Muslim is a murderer. And then you get, as I get now, apologists for murderers and rapists, which is the conclusive proof of how mad you are and how radicalised you've become. People who write that to me, as you sit here and say, come down like a ton of bricks on people who commit crimes, string up the rapists from the nearest lampposts, lock the murderers up forever. This fella who's committed this atrocity in Berlin, whatever his motivation is, and it hasn't been established yet, but whatever it turns out to be, don't change the punishment according to the motivation. Fit the punishment to the crime. The crime was to kill 12 people, to terrorise countless more. There's no controversy here. Come down on him with the full force of the law, as Angela Merkel has suggested. But if you've been radicalised by Islamophobic hatred, you now hear someone apparently being an apologist for rapists and murderers. Come down on rapists and murderers with absolute fury, with the wrath of the gods. No, that's apologist for rapists and murderers, because you know what he does, that O'Brien bloke? He talks about some Muslims as if they're not rapists and murderers. He says that we shouldn't treat them all like they are. Come down on the ones that have committed crimes like a ton of proverbial bricks. Oh yeah, he's sticking up for them again, sticking up for the murderers again. Lock them up until their life is, lock them up until their life is over. Oh yeah, there he goes with his liberal, airy-fairy ways. That's where we are now as a nation. This is the weirdest thing. You hear the words coming out of my mouth, right? Okay? Lock them up. Sound like Donald Trump. Lock them up. This man, I am not a fan of the death penalty, largely because it goes against the Ten Commandments, but also because there have been miscarriages of justice in the past, and it's always seemed to me that to kill somebody is not the best way of saying that to a society that killing somebody is bad. But in cases like this, these are the ones that dip under the wire of your liberalism. These are the ones that dip under the wire of your humanitarianism. These are the sort of stories that make you think, you know what, maybe just once in a while the death penalty would be all right. Oh, listen to that liberal apologist saying that the death penalty might be all right in this case. What? And that's where we are now. That's what this sort of weird echo chamber of social media has done. It's actually created people. I've got one fella here who claims to have been educated at Cambridge. I won't say his name, that would be unfair. But at least he's actually using his real name on Twitter. They're accusing what you are hearing now is somehow an apologist for rapists and murderers. Somebody saying lock them up forever. That's apologising. What does that really mean? He's an apologist for rapists and murderers. Well, what that means is exactly what Islamic State want it to mean. Here is somebody who doesn't believe that someone can be a Muslim and not be a murderer or a rapist. Because the only people I'm being a, quote, apologist for today are innocent people like you and like your children who've done nothing wrong and do not deserve to be tarred with a brush of terrorism or a brush of crime because they've not done anything wrong. So to speak in the most biblical of terms about the retribution that should be wreaked upon the people who have done something wrong, again, death penalty. I'd also go on the old freedom of thought, freedom of speech thing. I'd be tempted to penalise or punish people who speak up in support of what's happened in Berlin, even though that flies in the face of some of my beliefs. And you see what just happened there. So me, uber liberal, whatever you want to call it, okay? Just I call it Christian democracy, for the record. Me, now, contemplating the possibility that A, the death penalty might be okay in some circumstances, and B, well, you know, I'm all for freedom of speech, but if someone actually starts cheering for this scumbag in Berlin, I think we could probably live with banging them up, couldn't we? Imagine what that will do to somebody who is not persuaded by the values of Christian democracy. If it can do it to me, I can sit here now with a straight face and catch myself halfway through a sentence in which I'm effectively saying, yeah, I mean, you know, obviously I'm against the death penalty, but this fella. And then in the same breath, you catch me saying, well, obviously freedom of speech and freedom of thought is really important, but, you know, someone tries to link this attack to Western foreign policy and claim that it was in any way justified, I'd be quite tempted to bang them up. That's a liberal speaking. stepping back from his lifelong opposition to the death penalty and his lifelong support of freedom of speech. So if someone like me can catch himself in the act like that, having his own values warped by these terrorists, what the hell is going to happen to someone who didn't have the same values in the first place? What the hell is going to happen to someone who doesn't know his way around Christian democracy? Somebody who doesn't believe in equality of human beings? Someone like me can have those fundamental values, the death penalty and freedom of speech, called into question by terrorists. That's what they do. They terrorize you into surrendering your values. So you struggle sometimes to understand the residents of what we historically like to call the box of trolls. It's not difficult to understand it. You start off from a position that is less Christian, less democratic, less tolerant, and you make the same journey. It's just that you've started off so far down the road that you end up in the same place where Islamic State started, which is saying we can't live alongside each other, we can't be tolerant, we can't be peaceful, we can't be harmonious, we can't be any of those things. They're literally, the lines are the same as what a hate preacher in Syria would spout. They are your enemy, the great shaitan, your enemy. And then I get text from Harrow saying our civilizations are completely incompatible. And still, I think actually the Islamic State leaders realise they're on the same side as the people in our midst, preaching the same thing but from the other side of the fence. Just wonder how many people are on the fence. 11:38 is the time. Jay's in East Ham. Jay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for having me on.
Very welcome.
I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying about how the vast majority of peace-loving, ordinary Muslims who are just trying to make ends meet, working hard like everybody else, they're not criminals, they're not terrorists, they actually care about their families and their communities. Our voices don't get heard. I myself, I'm a convert. I converted to Islam 17 years ago. I think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It inspired me to become a doctor, particularly one line in the Quran: whoever saves the life of one man, it is as if he has saved all of mankind. And the converse: whoever kills the life of one man, it is as if he has taken the lives of all of mankind. And that's a very...
Again, as I say this to all callers who cite a sort of scriptural rationale for their worldview, you know that we could pile into the Quran and find very different bloodthirsty verses and bloodthirsty chapters, and no one is going to be doing that more enthusiastic. Sorry, carry on. Yes.
Yeah, no, but taking a scholarly approach and actually contextualizing those verses, if you know, of course you can open a book and you can take things out of context, but when you actually study the scriptures, they're not promoting hatred and murder and just indiscriminate violence. No scripture preaches that. And the people that take the time to study scriptures will realize that. And I'm not, I understand what you're saying. Any lunatic can pick up the Quran and pick
so I wasn't suggesting you were a lunatic.
No, but they do. That's what they do. They cherry pick verses that suit their agenda to justify the disgusting and grievous things that they do. But just getting back to the point, what I was trying to say is that actually for the vast majority of Muslims and actually Christian, Jewish people, religious people, our faiths motivate us, inspire us, encourage us, teach us to be good human beings and serve humanity, serve God through serving people, whether that be our families, our communities, our societies, and our voices never get heard. And I'm not just speaking as a Muslim, I'm speaking as a religious person just in general. Our voices, I mean, the vast, majority of NGOs and charities that have been inspired by faith that are doing so much good globally. People say, oh, religion is the cause of all evil, but actually religion motivates so much good in the world. So much good, and our voices never get heard because it's not interesting. You can't sensationalize that.
Why not? Why not? Can I look? What do we do? How do you make that voice louder?
I think media has.
You shouldn't have to, but I think we're moving towards a place where you kind of do, aren't we?
Yeah, the media has a responsibility to try to present a more balanced view, so an array of voices. And as you say, they always pull out Anjem Choudary.
Well, not anymore, thank goodness, because he's in prison finally.
Yeah, they always used to pull him out because but he was the least qualified person. He was not a scholar, and.
I don't know if that's the answer. This is because I've been mentioning Christianity a hell of a lot more in the last few months than I ever have done before. But I think I don't know that the scholarliness or scriptural scholarship is so historically fraught.
No. But what I mean is, get people on who are qualified or people who are representative of the vast majority of Muslims, not a minority within a minority. And also, Muslims like me, we're all sad and horrified at the tragedy that's happened in Germany. We're just ordinary people. We just want to make ends meet. We're working hard. We want a positive future for ourselves and our families and our communities. And I think, going back to your question about what can we do, personally, I think in this country, if we go back to Muslim and Christian values and Judaic values of reaching out to your neighbor, getting to know people who you live next door to. I mean, the Prophet Muhammad talked about, you should be concerned about the well-being of the 40 neighbors in your vicinity. So if we reach out and talk to our neighbors, we see we live next door to a Muslim family or a non-Muslim family, and we have actually never spoken to them or invited them in or invited them over for a cup of tea. We need to ordinary people need to reach out, and ordinary people need to have some sort of discernment in what kind of media outlets they're reading and accessing. There are right-wing papers in this country and there are left-wing papers in this country, and we self-select. So I read The Guardian because I'm a leftist, and the people that read the Daily Mail and the Sun, they're going to keep having their opinions reaffirmed.
Well, so are you.
The poison that those... Yeah, of course. Yeah. And you know what? I try to make a point of reading the Daily Mail.
You've got LBC on, so you're probably exposed to a few voices slightly to the right of the Daily Mail.
But I just wanted to make a few quick points.
No, you've had loads of time. You can't. No, Jay. Sorry, you've made brilliant points. And so no, you can't. No. I've got a full switchboard.
Okay.
Producers looking at me like I'm doing something wrong. What's the point of... go on then, I'll give you another minute. Have a minute.
You know what, James, you know what? The EDL claim to be a Christian organisation.
Do they?
Okay.
Don't be silly.
Yeah, they claim to... Listen, they talk about this is a Christian country. Okay, this was a Christian country. But if they're true to their Christian values, you know what they need to be doing? They need to be acting in the spirit of Jesus, and they need to be opening their arms to the poor, the vulnerable, the destitute, the refugees or fleeing a war zone. And if the situation was reversed and Europe was being bombed and the Middle East was a safe haven, I know that's hard to imagine, but if it was, and our children's lives were being destroyed, our homes were being destroyed, our beloved moms were being killed in front of our eyes, and the Middle East was saying, you know what, we're going to open our doors to those poor European refugees. Would we not go? Would we not flee? If our country was in havoc and destruction?
I'm glad. That's a great question. I'm glad I gave you that extra minute, and I'm glad you took such good use of it. Jay, thank you very much indeed. 11:45 is the time. Remember, she's a doctor. Just like Roy earlier was a paramedic who worked on July the 7th. And yet, when you close your eyes and you see a Muslim, if you live outside a big city, if you live outside a diverse melting pot, if you've managed to somehow avoid multiculturalism, when you close your eyes and I say Muslim, you don't see doctors like Jay or paramedics like Roy. You see scum like the man driving that truck in Berlin. And that's not a controversial observation. That's a perfectly natural place to have arrived at. The challenge you have, if you believe in Western values, to be loose, or indeed Christian values, to be slightly more specific, the challenge you have is hanging on to those values in the face of these provocations, these attempts to terrorise us, because they work. Politics after 12 o'clock, a few other things to talk about as well. But in the meantime, brilliant calls today. I know that there's a lot of hate and anger out there, and I some days enjoy poking it. Not today. You see an act of such epic hatred as that one undertaken in Germany yesterday. Details still not confirmed, but the picture is, if you like, clearing. And the question is pretty simple. What do you do on a day like today? Do you try and stoke it up? Do you start trying to score points with your sworn political enemies? Do you start trying to say that this is all the fault of Angela Merkel, or it's all the fault of the far right for promoting Islamophobic sentiment that young people like this person in Berlin might respond to in the most violent way? Or do you just try and find common ground? I'm sorry if you were looking for a scrap today. You've come to the wrong place. Just looking for common ground. And the common ground has thrown up a few thoughts. Namely, there are only two sides in these sort of disputes. People who believe in harmony and people who don't. Which is why David Harrow picked up so much attention. He categorically doesn't. It is utterly incompatible, apparently, the Muslim way, with The Western way, Peter picks up on that. Says, when Dave says that Islam is incompatible with the West, I think what he really means is that Islam is incompatible with Dave. This is an altogether different thing. Peter adds, I'm writing this at work where I'm sitting next to my manager, a Muslim woman in a headscarf who's been happily chatting away with me this morning about my Christmas plans. If that's incompatible, okay then, Dave. Mohammed's in Oxford. Mohammed, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call, first-time caller.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Well, first of all, absolutely, horrified and aghast at what happened in Berlin. Anywhere where that happens, obviously, loss of human life, regardless of whether it's Christian or in the name of Islam, whatever. It's a terrible event. I just want to basically talk about a little bit about integration. Perhaps being a Muslim and an immigrant, maybe I don't understand the word integration very much, but perhaps some of you will call is like the gentleman who said, we would never, as Muslims, we would never integrate.
Incompatible. You're completely incompatible with me.
Right, but just for his information and just generally, I mean, I'm married to a white European lady, and we have two little boys, aged 7 and 5. 2 days ago, in the evening, we were at a church, horror shock, standing in a nativity play while my little boy was dressed as an angel in the church, doing this play. Now, there was people there, there was other Muslims, I was there. The priest, he read some hymns, he done the prayers. Now, I'm not going to lie and say, I partook my, I stood up and read the hymns, but I stood up in respect. I had my head bowed, but in my heart, I was thinking, I'm Muslim, I shouldn't be here. Come on, seriously? I run 2 businesses here in the UK, in Oxford. I grew up in the UK. Most of my friends are English, European, all walks of lives. I employ people from all walks of lives. We have Christmas parties. My neighbours are English, white. I give them Christmas presents. They always bring Christmas presents for my little boys. And yet, I pray as a Muslim. I don't drink. I don't eat pork. Maybe that's the integration I need to do.
Well, you think Dave would be comfortable if you started eating bacon and drinking beer?
Maybe. And possibly if you saw me legless walking down the street, you'd think, he's integrated as a Muslim.
It's a little bit crass, but I like your point. It's a good point. The problem is this, isn't it? Is that that there are communities that are not integrated, and that probably in terms of numbers, it's a bigger problem for British Muslims, or it's a bigger problem among British Muslims. If you think it is a problem, I tend to think it's a problem. I think you limit your life. We did it on the English language thing. We spoke to a lot of daughters of women who don't speak English, and they were mostly pitying their mums and their inability to integrate more. And it may well have been, and in some cases it was, that their dads had deliberately put that in position, and it's not gone away. It still exists. So I don't know, where does the twain meet? How do people are people like you even relevant to the conversation about unintegrated Muslims? I don't know that you are.
I mean, I don't know myself. But, just the final point. I mean, just to lump everybody in the same bracket. Now, on my street, I've got neighbours either side of me. They're both, Caucasian, white people, English people, and we have a fantastic relationship. Now, just about 7-8 doors away from me, there's another gentleman, elderly gentleman, English. Now, he absolutely hates me, okay? And he hates anybody of a different colour. And many times he's walked past me and said, you shouldn't be parking here. How do you park where you come from? Why don't you go back to where you come from? And I was smart and I laughed at him and I've tried to have a conversation with him. But am I supposed to think now that every English person or every white person is racist and my life is not compatible with them?
Well, it's a rhetorical question, isn't it? It's a rhetorical question, and I don't know what goes on in the minds of people that answer, yes, you are. I mean, or rather in the minds of people who think they are justified in being suspicious about all Muslims, and then what do they say when somebody white does something awful? Are we supposed to now be suspicious of all white people, all Capricorns, all Cancers? So a couple of people pointing out that almost all the callers today, I find it very interesting that every Muslim contributor has, for whatever reason, given their condolences for the victims of the attack in Berlin. I don't know what you mean by that. If you find it interesting, I'm glad. I think everybody's kind of done that. You don't have to. I always work on the presumption that it goes without saying. everybody's feelings are first and foremost with the families of the victims. But, we're 2 hours into this conversation now, so what was said at the very beginning probably does merit repetition. Mohammed, thank you. And look, Mohammed sounds like me. This is my point. I don't have a particularly big drum to thump on a day like today. I chat to a lad like Mohammed. He's got 2 little children, making his way in the world, trying to get on with stuff. He's got, I don't have neighbours who are as obnoxious as his, but maybe if I was brown-skinned, I'd find out that I did. I doubt it, but, that's the way of the world. That's the way of the world. And yet some people hate the world. They hate it. They hate our world. They hate the world in which Mohammed and I could find each other on a radio dial, have a chat over the phones. They hate that world. They want to keep things separate, divided, split. And I think after nearly 2 hours of this conversation, if you've been kind enough to listen, you and you didn't get it before, you get it now. You get it now. Yes, if you are literally living in a country where somebody can hear a bloke on the radio say, string him up from the nearest lamppost, lock him up and throw away the key, and then take to Twitter to say, another apologist for the Muslims. That is the country we're creating now, because we've kind of given up on scrutiny and truth. Yes, there are scum out there, but guess what? They're every colour under the sun, the scum. They can call themselves whatever religion they want, the scum. They can claim divine inspiration for their devilish acts, the scum. They're scum. And then there's the rest of us who don't want to live in a sort of form of cultural apartheid. 0345 6060 973. And guess what? You can be like me. You can have a really deep problem with the full face veil. You can be dismayed and even heartbroken by the ghettoisation of communities, the thought of a woman who's lived here for 30 years and has not been able to avail herself of all the things we take for granted, all the things we value, because of a sort of cultural suppression coupled with failure to learn the language. Don't hate the people that can't speak the language. Give them reasons to learn it. It's so straightforward, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep saying this. I've got a horrible feeling 2017 is going to see even more of it. This is supposed to be a Christian country. If we mean anything by that, anything at all, then it's Luke's parable of the Good Samaritan that we should have really in the forefront of our minds, or Paul's observation that the most powerful commandment of all was not one that Moses brought down from the mountain. The most powerful commandment of all is love thy neighbour. Love thy neighbour. What did Mohammed just say about his neighbour? Yeah, he tells me I should go back where I come from all the time, but I just smile. Who's being more Christian there? The bloke upholding Christian values? Or Mohammed, the Muslim? Who's being more Christian? Who's loving his neighbour? The one abusing his neighbour because he's brown? Or the one laughing it off and trying to start a civilised conversation? And Mohammed's existence doesn't mean that there aren't terrorists calling themselves Muslim. Of course it doesn't. But the terrorist's existence doesn't mean that there aren't people like Mohammed out there either. So you have a choice. All of us have a choice. Either you try to cling on to the values, the Christian values that have formed this country, a country of welcome and warmth and tolerance, or you're opposed to it. And if you're opposed to it, I'm afraid you are a hell of a lot closer to the Islamic State worldview than you are to mine. It's that simple. I believe in harmony. Call me a hippie if you want. I believe in humanity. Call me an idealist if you want. I don't believe that we should build our societies according to who and how we hate. Islamic State believe that, and so too do people like David Harrow and Mark Cheshire. Doesn't make you evil. Makes you wrong, in my opinion. Doesn't make you cruel or callous. It makes you a bit stupid, in my humble view. But you're on the same side. Don't make any mistake about that. Either you believe in harmony or you hate it. And we now, I think, are seeing a bit of an upsurge in our countries of the number of people who believe in hate, or think that hate should trump harmony, or that, indeed, hate should trump hope. Well, I'm hope, not hate. It's not controversial. It's not difficult. It is difficult, actually, on days like today. Of course it is. The temptation, the seductive temptation of hatred, which at least makes you think that you're somehow doing something meaningful in response to the horror, is huge. But again, Christianity teaches you to resist that hatred. It teaches you to turn the other cheek, but goodness knows, I don't know how many of us are capable of that level of selflessness. I'm certainly not. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that people like Mohammed and all my other callers over the last 2 hours don't exist. They do. That's all I've proved to you today. They do. They're there. Be nice to them.